I'm going to show you how to make this pretty pinny 1950s inspired apron. I haven't used a pattern for it. You measure yourself so you know that it's going to fit you absolutely perfectly, and I think you're going to look very glam in the kitchen. Now I've measured around the width of where I want the top part of my apron to go, the skirt of my apron to go. I'm not quite meeting at the back, and mine's about 26 inches, so that's my first piece of fabric. I'm actually on 27 inches there, but it doesn't have to be perfect, that's not set in stone. And lengthwise for this piece is 18 inches. So fold it in half. And on this corner I want to cut a curve because that's the bit that's going to go around my waist. So I'm going to measure 4 inches from the corner to one side and 4 inches from this corner to the other side. And then I'll need to draw a curve from one piece to the other. If you're not very confident on drawing curves, because that's 4 inches, if I use an 8-inch side plate or something that's 8 inches across and round, I can draw around that curve and then I get the perfect shape. Now the next thing I want to do, but I'll cut this out first, is to echo that curve around the hemline. So now I know I've got a perfect curve there. I normally do this on the back or use a pen that disappears so you don't see the pencil marks. But just so you can see what I'm doing. Oh, wrong way around. So from my curve, which is my waist, to the bottom of my apron is 10 inches. Okay? So if I keep measuring from that curve, 10 inches, I can put as many marks on there as I want to so that I can just join them all together and get that perfect curve. 10 inches, another one, then I know I've got the right shape. So I'll just cut around where the marks were. If you want to join those together with a pencil, that's fine. So this is going to be the top part, the top frill if you like, of my apron, which is going to fit around there. Now before you cut into your expensive fabric, try making it up in just a piece of calico or a piece of old sheet or cotton or some scrap fabric that you've got left over from somewhere else, because then you know that your apron is going to fit. You can tailor make it to fit your measurements exactly, and you're not wasting any fabric, because things like this you can always reuse again anyway for smaller projects. So that's just a bit of a tip if you want to get it right. You don't have to make it up and make it completely finished, just gives you an idea for the main pieces as to how they're going to fit. So back to my skirt piece. The second part to make is the piece that goes underneath, which sounds a bit back to front, but that's how it works. So this is my underneath bit. I've folded it in half already, and for mine this measures about 21 inches in length, and that's 40 inches wide. I don't actually need that much. And I'm going to use this section as a template. So I know the curve around the waist is fine. So I'll use that as a template for the bottom piece. And then so that this shows underneath, I want to add length to the curve at the bottom. So just like I made the curve for the top section, I'll do the same at the bottom, and I'm going to go for an extra, let's go for an extra 5 inches. So again, I'll mark all of those 5 inches all the way around, join them together, and then cut them out. I think if you're making this apron in the same way that I have, I would buy 1 metre of this fabric, of the bottom fabric, and ½ metre of the top fabric. Obviously if you want to make it larger, you're going to need to order that a little bit more, or if you want the skirt a little bit fuller so that it ties all the way around, then you're going to need maybe 1.5 metres and 1 metre of the different fabrics. So again, if I wanted to draw those lines together, that's fine. So I'll just cut those around. Oops. Right, so that's my skirts. And I'll just show you again how those are going to fit. So those two will be sewn together. Those are going to sit around the waist. I'll have a pocket on the front and I'll have frills around those as well, or pleats actually around those. So I'll show you how I do that in just a second. But first of all I'm going to cut the bib part. I need the measurement that I want to attach the bib to just around the waist. So I'm going to go for about 15 inches, again it doesn't have to be exact. I need a measurement from just under the arm to just under the arm, which is 13 inches on my dummy. So 15, 13, and then from just over the top of where the armpit is, down to just below the waist, which is again 13 inches. So the first piece of fabric that I need to cut needs to be 15 inches across the bottom. So I've got my fabric folded in half. So I'll need 7.5 inches either side at the bottom, which is about there. And again, don't worry about that being exact, it doesn't really matter. I'm using the pattern on this fabric to cut by, but at home you'd measure that properly. And then I was 13 inches down, which is there. Then if I divide my 13 into 2, which would be 6.5, because my fabric's folded in half, I'll put a little mark here, and then I need to cut at an angle, just like that. Okay, if you wanted to measure that perfectly, that's fine. Now what I'm also going to do while I'm kind of got this in half is to just curve around slightly the two open edges, and then I'm going to curve around only slightly to start with. You can always adjust this later on if it's not deep enough, into the centre, so that goes into the fold. So when I open it up, I've got that kind of shape. So that's going to go on top of my skirt. So this is how we're looking at the moment. Then I'll need some strips of fabric, mine are 4 inches wide, and I'm going to make a tube out of each of those, and that's going to be my waistband, but the waistband and the tie is going to go all the way around. That'll be in one. That'll also make the neck section, which will go here. And then I'll need lots of frills as well, and I'll show you how to make those in just a second. But basically I've cut strips of 2.5 inches wide, fold that into half, and I'll show you who's making the noise in a second. Fold that in half, and then I'm going to pleat it. So to measure how much of the pleated fabric you're going to need, I'm going to go all the way around the bib, so measure that. I'm going to go all the way around my first hemline, so measure that, and all the way around my second hemline, measure that, and then times that by 3, because that's how much you're going to fold over and pleat this fabric. It shrinks by a third, so you will need quite a lot of that. So, I did say I was going to show you who's making the noise, so bear with me. Come here, Percy. Here he is. This is my grand dog. This is my son's dog. This is Bert. I know. And this is Alfie's very, very best friend. So Alfie's asleep at the moment. But Bertie doesn't seem to sleep, do you? Yes. So I'm going to go play with Bert for a minute, and then we'll get the sewing machine out and start putting this apron together. To make my pleated frill, which is going to go all the way around the edge of my apron, I've taken several strips of fabric which measure about 3 inches across and as long as the width of your fabric is. I've folded it in half and I've already pressed it. Now if you wanted to pin this so that every single pleat is going to be exactly the same distance from the next one, then that's fine. I don't think it matters for this, so I'm going to do this kind of as I go along. So all I'm doing is to sew a few stitches, just a tack, it doesn't have to be neat or small stitches or anything. Pinch, fold and sew. And if you sew slowly, then you probably find that you can carry on just pleating and sewing without stopping. So if you don't want to use this technique and you want to have every single pleat absolutely uniform, then you'll need to pin this before you sew it. But I really don't think it matters for the apron. I'm not even going to join the different strips of fabric together. I'll do that actually on the apron. Get into quite a rhythm with it, it's like choreography. This a little bit, fold that over again. And my pleats are around about, I don't know, a quarter of an inch or half an inch across. And just carry on doing that until the whole strip's done. I shan't finish that one for now. Okay. The next thing I'm going to do with my strips of fabric, these are the ones that I cut to 4 inches wide, and this is what's going to make the tie around the centre and the waistband of the apron, and this is going to make the shoulder strap as well. I'm just going to have one ring all the way around the shoulders. So I'm just literally going to sew these into tubes, so fold in half lengthwise. This is going around the neckline. So you can measure this with your tape measure, just make sure that it's not going to be too tight. Then you sew it into a tube, turn the tube inside out, and then press it before you apply it. So that's going to be my neck strap. That's actually a lot longer than I need it, but better to cut it down than try to add on to it later. With the strap around the waistband and the ties around the waist, I'm going to have to join the fabric. And I don't want to see a seam for the join right in the centre of my apron. I'd rather see 2 joins, one either side here, than one join straight in the centre. So I'm going to cut one strip of fabric, which is around about the same length as my centrepiece. So that'll go around here. And then I'll have 2 longer pieces, and just gauge this yourself how long you need those to be. Again, better too long than too short, you can always cut things down afterwards. But I'm going to join 2 pieces of the longer fabric onto the side here, and then we'll do exactly the same, fold in half, right sides together, sew along the whole of the tube and turn the whole lot inside out, and then I'll press it. So my strips are sewn into tubes. An easy way to turn these the right way out would be just to pop a safety pin through one end and literally feed it back through itself, and then simply pull it through. You can buy loop turners which work just in the same kind of way, but if you don't have one, then this is an easy way to do that. So basically I've cut out the 2 panels that are going to go around the bottom of the apron, and then I've got the bib for the top. This is the strap that goes around the neckline. Again, it's a little bit too long at the moment, but you can cut that down afterwards. And then I've got the strap to go all the way around the waistband and tie at the back. The only other thing I'm going to do is just to pop a pocket onto the front of the apron, and I've just done this part. Oh, the fabric I'm using, by the way, is a Tilda fabric, this one, but anything that's 100% cotton. Most fabrics nowadays are pre-washed, but if you wanted to wash your fabric before you put your project together, particularly as this is an apron, so it is going to be washed a lot, that might be a good idea, just so that you know that your fabric isn't going to shrink when it's washed. So that's how I do it. That's pulled through. What I then do is take that over to the ironing board, leave the ends open for now, and then press it open, but with the seam running down the back. So that's the neck strap. This is the one that's going to go around the waist that I've already pressed. So that's how it looks. So that'll finish up at around, well, just under 2 inches across, and I think that's fine. At this point, tie this around your waist, tie a big bow at the back, and just make sure that the fabric's not too long. You can always cut that down if it is. The next thing we're going to do is to start putting the frill around the top section, around the bib. I have cut out a lining piece of fabric as well. It doesn't really matter what that is. It's nice if it all matches, but it just gives a little bit of stability to the fabric. So I've got 2 pieces exactly the same for the bib. So take your frill, just make sure that this one piece is long enough to go all the way around, and then turn it so it's facing inwards, and we're going to pin, but sandwich this frill in between the lining and the outside of the bib. And you can do that all in one go. So just make sure that your raw edges match up. And pin. And this just means that when you turn it the right way round, the frill is going to sit nice and neatly. You won't see any raw edges on this part. It will be inside. So I'm just keeping my fabrics nice and flat as I do that. So when I do sew the 2 sides together, I'm going to sew slightly inwards from the stitches that are holding the pleats together. Remember when I put all of that through the machine beforehand, and I've got a stitch line which is about 1/8 of an inch in. I'm going to stitch inside that so I don't see any of the stitches. Now when I go around the top, it will gather up a little bit, and that's fine. As long as all of your edges meet up, then it's going to look nice and neat. So, if you didn't want to pleat fabric like I have here as well, because it does use a lot to be fair, then you can buy actually already pleated ribbon. It can be quite expensive, and you won't have exactly the same fabric obviously, but that's an option. Or you could use some broderie anglaise. You can buy that off the roll and fit that. I'm just making sure that I've got enough fabric in the centre of the bust line there. Or you don't have to do anything with it at all. You could just sew the 2 pieces of fabric, the front of the bib and the back of the bib together without any frill. You don't have to put frills on this. I think that's the beauty of not following a pattern, because you can change your mind as you go, or you could add little bits. And if you decide when you've finished, oh well, my stitches weren't quite perfect there, then you can always add a button or a bow to cover over any kind of mistakes. I think this is quite a simple apron. It looks very fussy when it's finished, as you saw at the beginning of the video, but it's actually very simple to make. So just down the last side, and then we'll sew this together. That's it. Nice to work with cotton as well. Don't use a stretch fabric, so nothing with elastane in. Cotton will wash really nicely, so better than a polyester, which can be a little bit scratchy sometimes. So just coming up to the end of this. And I'll cut the loose bit off right at the end. And then remember, I needed to sew all the way around, but just inside where that's the first stitch line was, which is about 1/8 of an inch. So I'm going to sew this at about 1/2 an inch or 1 centimetre. Back tack first of all. And I normally use the side of the foot of my sewing machine as a guide, so I know I'm sewing in a straight line. So just go around the curves. I'll cut into those before when I turn it the other way around, before I turn it the other way around. So into the centre there, just keeping my stitches at the same distance away from the edge. When I get into the centre here, I'm just going to stop, turn my fabric around, and then with the hand wheel I'm just going to do one stitch. It makes it easier to turn, or gives that a nice little V when you do turn it the other way around, and then carry on sewing all the way around. I'm going to attach the frill to the skirt section. Before I do, because I'm going to take this all the way from the waist and around the side and all the way around the bottom, I'm going to make the corner bits here rounded, because it'll be easier to put the frill on. So I'll just fold those two pieces back over together again, and if I do it on this section, remember I need to copy that onto the section that goes underneath as well. So literally, I'm not using a template, I'm literally just going to cut around in a curve. If you want to draw around a plate, that may make it a little bit easier. Now there's only one layer of fabric on this part, so I don't have to worry about linings. But again, what I'm going to do is attach the frill face downwards, and because this doesn't have a lining and I'm not going to use my overlocker at this point, I'm going to sew that face in using a zigzag stitch, and then turn it over and then top stitch to hold it in place. And the zigzag stitch will help to stop the fabric from fraying, because that can look a little bit tatty on the inside. So I'm not going to pin for this section, I'm just going to go straight ahead and start sewing, just so that we can make this up a little bit quicker. So I need my zigzag quite close to the edge, and quite a tight zigzag, because this isn't just decorative, this is to serve a purpose, to again stop that fabric from fraying. If you've got an overcasting type of stitch on your machine, that would be just as good, and if you do have a serger or an overlocker, then this would be a good time to use it. So just around the curve. And a curve's an easier option rather than sewing around a square when you're putting frills on. So. Try and make sure your needle stays in the down position when you finish sewing, when you come to the end of a stretch. So it helps to hold the fabric in place while you reposition and maneuver the fabric. Like so. What I did do is, after I've sewn together all of my pleats before putting them onto the fabric, I did trim down the very edge of the fabric here just with my rotary cutter and ruler to make it a little bit straighter, and make sure that all of those frayed little bits and bobs were trimmed away to start with, so it doesn't look too tatty on the inside. There we go. Halfway there. Very retro and girly and kitsch and very of the era, if you like. If you're not going to add the frill, then you need to turn over the hem twice and just top stitch it to make sure it doesn't fray. Or you could put a lining fabric behind it, just like we did with the top section. And then of course when you turn it the right way around, it doesn't fray in that respect. Just around the corner. finished. So if you've got your iron on now, I'd press that at this point. But just for speed's sake again, I'm just going to go straight to top stitch. So there's my zigzag stitch. I can trim away any excess fibres now. I'm just going to turn that over and go back to a straight stitch and top stitch around about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. And if you're confident with your stitching, you could use a contrast colour at this point so it stands out. So in this case, maybe a pink or a red would look nice. This is holding the frill flat as well as looking decorative. The next step after adding the frill is I'm going to put a little pocket just on the front. Nice to have an apron with a pocket, we all found them useful. So I have cut a rectangle of my backing fabric, the check fabric, to make the pocket out of. Nearly there. Would have helped if I could press that first of all, because all I'm doing here is pulling the frill away from the fabric so that it's nice and flat. So I'm not getting any pleating in the fabric. There you go. No, nearly done. Okay, so that's where we are at the moment with the skirt. The next thing to do is to put your fabric on there. Very difficult to put your fabric on here and pin it in place when you're supporting the dog's head with your arm. But we'll see what we can do. So my fabric measures around about 7 inches square. I'll need to fold over the top side of that twice and top stitch, but before I sew this on I'm going to fold over all 3 of the sides by around about 1 centimetre or ½ an inch and press that before I sew because it makes it that little bit easier. I top stitched across the top of the pocket and folded that over twice. Before you position your pocket, just hold the apron up to yourself, to your body, and just make sure that it's going to sit in the right position, because if you put the pocket too far to the side then you're kind of with a pocket on your backside instead of on the front. So I'm just pinning this. If you wanted to go really over the top, you could put a frill around the edge of the pocket as well, but we shan't this time. There. So I'm just going to straight stitch down the 3 sides, and at the start and the stop, always back tack anyway, but I'm going to do a few extra stitches backwards and forwards here. Because with it being a pocket, if I put things in there, that's where it's going to take the strain. So I just want to make sure that the stitches don't come undone. Leave the needle down while you pivot around the corner. That holds the fabric in position. Look up to the next corner. And then the final side. And again, just those few extra stitches just to make sure that pocket isn't going to come undone. Pins out. And then we'll start to put the apron together. So that's how we're looking at the moment with the top half of the skirt. So let's piece it all together. I've got the bottom section, which is this. The top section of the skirt sits on top like so, and then I'll want the bib sit on top of there like that. So first of all, find the centre part of the bib by simply folding that in half, crease with your fingers, and then either pop a mark with a pen or a pencil, or pop a pin in there. And then I'm going to do the same with the top section of the skirt. We'll move the bottom one out of the way for the moment. So again, fold that in half, mark the centre section, and I'm going to join these two pieces together first. Right sides together, face side down, and I'm going to start where those two pins meet and just pin the raw edges together. The bib isn't the same width as the waist of the skirt, so don't worry that the edges won't meet. That's not the way that we measured it to start with. Make sure that the bib lies nice and flat, because remember you've got your lining on the back of this. And then pin from the opposite direction. Just straightening out the curve on the waist of the skirt. Like so. And then we'll just secure that in place. This can be quite a long stitch because it's only basting or tacking the pieces together. And then we'll put the second section of the skirt underneath. Okay, so that's how we're looking for the top, the front section. And then remember, this is going to sit on top of the skirt, like so. So if I fold this section back over, I'm going to lay this one with the wrong side down on top of that section. And this time, the waist, the curved waist of the top skirt and the bottom skirt should meet. And this is right side up, so that when it flips over to the other side, I'm going to see the right side of the fabric underneath. So it feels a little bit alien because normally you sew right sides together, but this time we're sewing wrong side to right side. I'm going to pin that if you like first. As this is a curve again, I'm going to snip those little V-shapes into it, or you can take your pinking shears and trim back to around about 1/4 of an inch from the seam. And then open out your apron, and normally now I'd press. So you can really see it starting to take shape now. You can see what's happening. Waistband goes on next. So I need to find the centre point of my waistband by folding it in half. I haven't finished off the edges of that one yet. So that's my halfway mark. And I'm going to pin this to the centre of my apron and start sewing from there. So again, to find the centre mark, fold the whole thing in half and pop a pin at the fold. And then my waistband, starting again at that centre point, is going to be sewn with the seam at the back of the tube that I made facing down onto the seam here. In fact, I'll start sewing not right in the centre because I want my stitches to look neat. I don't want them to overlap where I start and stop. I'm going to start just on the side here. And this is why, remember right at the beginning when I joined the waistband together, I said I didn't want a seam in the centre of the waistband. My seam's actually here, and the same on the other side. So although you don't really see it, it would be very noticeable if it was right there in the centre. So that's why it works better when we did it that way. Now I'm going to sew on top stitch around about 1/4 inch from the edge. And I'm going to sew not just around the waistband that's actually attaching the tie to the apron. I'm going to follow that through all the way around the edge so it matches, so it's a nice neat line. So top stitch all the way around here. When I get to the ends, which I hadn't finished off with the sewing machine, I'm just going to fold those in by about 1 centimetre or 1/2 inch, and then top stitch across there to make it nice and square. So that's where we're at the moment. I've sewn the waistband on all the way around, as I said, and carried on the stitching all the way around the rest of the tape. On the inside, you've got a nice neat finish on the inside with no raw edges when I took the bib inside the 2 sections of the skirt, so that's nice and neat. Just be careful as you're sewing the waistband on, because easy to sew across the bib at the top because it's straight, but the curve of the skirt will try to fight back, so make sure that you keep that nice and flat when you sew that curve in place. And then when you pop it on or when you hold it up, you get these lovely folds. Now the last thing to do, or one of the last things to do, is to put the rest of the strapping around the neckline. Now with mine, I'm just going to have the loop sewn on so that it fits over your head. So a couple of things, you need to try your apron on now, and then put the extra strap around your neck and pop a couple of pins in there, be careful, and just make sure that this is big enough that you can take it on and off of your head. If it's not, you may want to put some buttons and buttonholes on the front to affix it that way, or put 2 straps on so that you can tie that in a bow at the back of your neck. Now just like with the waistband, I'm just going to fold under the ends of my strap. I've already measured this one. And I'm going to pin that to the middle of the curved section. So I've already tried this on, so I know that that's where it's going to fit. And I'm just going to stitch that from the back. Make sure when you pull the loop around that it doesn't twist, otherwise it won't sit flat on your neckline. So again, just fold into the raw edges to keep it nice and neat. And in the same place on the other side, I'm just going to pin that. Now to attach this, just make sure that's symmetrical, I'm going to sew from the front side backwards and forwards a few times, but try and keep my stitches inside that seam so you don't see them. It doesn't matter too much, I don't think anyone's going to pick you up on seeing stitches, but it's quite nice to have them invisible, if you can. And I'm just sewing over that 3 times to make it nice and secure. Isn't too bad, you don't see those too well. Pin out. And then the same on this side. So we're almost finished. The last thing I am actually going to do, because I've got some leftover fabric, let's cut my threads, I'm going to put a bow just on the end of the strap on this side with some of my scraps. So I've got a rectangle of fabric, and that measures about 11 inches by 6, doesn't have to be exact, and I'm going to make that into a tube. So sew down the one side, I'm going to leave a bit of a gap so that I can turn it the right way around. And I'm not going to sew square across this side, I'm going to open those 2 sides up so that my seam is in the centre at the back, and then sew across the side, so I don't see a seam from the front. Nice and flat. And turn that the right way around. I'll just snip off the corners so I get a nice sharper point to the corners. And push those out. I'm going to fold it in half. I'm not bothered about sewing up the back section. Fold in half and finger crease so I can see where the centre line is. And then I'm just going to put a couple of tucks in there. I'm not going to bother pinning it, it doesn't have to be perfect. And I'm just going to sew down that centre line to hold those tucks in place. And just to make that look nice and neat, this is the leftover strap from the strap that I made from around the neck. That's going to go wrap around the centre of my bow like that. So I'll cut that down again. Make a little tube out of this section. Thread my bow through the middle. So I've got that. And this is the only part I'm actually going to hand sew. And I'm just going to stitch that onto the end of my strap like that. And I'm going to sew it by hand because I don't want to see the stitches from the outside, and by hand I can actually take the stitches inside here. So I'll just get some thread and my machine and a needle, and we'll stitch that on.